I thought the circus was just an abandoned ruin, a story for my camera, nothing more. But the laughter I heard inside wasn't from the past, it was waiting for me. When I stepped under that torn tent, the lights flickered back on, and the show began again. Only then did I realize the audience wasn't alive. Greetings, every shadow hides a story. Welcome. Under the Bed. It happened in the summer of 2018, on the outskirts of a small town called Halewood, about 40 miles from Denver. Locals knew the place as the Hill, a wide field covered in weeds and surrounded by birch trees. That was where the old traveling circus, the Golden Smile, had once stood. 15 years earlier, it had been shut down after what newspapers called a tragic accident during a performance. Nobody ever explained what that accident really was. People stopped talking about it, and eventually the posters faded, the caravans rusted, and the big tent was left to rot. Mark, 25 years old, had just finished his journalism degree. He loved stories that everyone else ignored: ghost towns, abandoned hospitals, forgotten lives. One evening, while scrolling through a local forum, he found a short post titled "The Circus Where No One Laughs Anymore." The message said that lights had been seen again at the old circus grounds. A few users joked about teenagers or squatters. But one comment simply said, "It's not them. They're still performing." Mark decided to go there the next morning with his camera. The road was barely visible under grass and broken glass. The air smelled of metal and damp soil. He passed what used to be the ticket booth. The words "Welcome to the Golden Smile" were still visible beneath peeling paint. His voice recorder clicked on as he whispered, "Entry point, 9:42 a.m., overcast, slight wind." He tried to sound professional, but his hands were shaking. Inside the perimeter, he found what looked like a children's shoe, half buried in the dirt. Nearby lay the cracked head of a porcelain doll, its painted grin melted by rain. The silence was deep, as if the entire field was holding its breath. Mark filmed every step. Birds didn't sing here. Not one sound except for the crunch of his boots. Then he saw it. Beyond a row of toppled benches, part of the big top was still standing. The fabric was faded to gray, the ropes torn, but the central pole held strong like a monument refusing to fall. He expected dust and decay, but when he looked closer, he noticed something impossible: several burned-down candles arranged in a circle near the entrance. They were still warm. Someone had been here recently. Mark spoke into the recorder again. Tent interior ahead. Evidence of recent activity. Unknown individuals, possibly locals. He lifted the flap of the tent and stepped inside. The air was colder, heavy with the smell of ash and something sweet, like old popcorn mixed with rust. In the center of the ring lay a cracked clown mask. Its paint had peeled away, leaving only black eyes. Around it, faded seats formed a perfect circle, as if waiting for an audience. Mark's camera light flickered, briefly illuminating posters on the wall. The faces of the performers smiled unnaturally wide. In one photo, the clown's head was turned slightly toward him, though the print was decades old. He continued recording, whispering notes, "Main stage intact. Objects moved recently." He zoomed in on a pile of programs near the entrance. On the last page, written in pencil, were 3 words: "The show continues." Mark's breath caught. He turned around slowly. Something shifted behind the curtain that divided the ring from the backstage area. He called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer, only a faint squeak, like a hinge or maybe a laugh. He pushed the curtain aside, revealing a narrow hallway of wagons connected together. Inside one, makeup containers were still open, dried brushes scattered on the floor. On the mirror, a faint handprint had appeared in the dust. His reflection wavered, distorted by cracks in the glass. For a moment, he thought he saw another face behind him, painted white, eyes hollow, but when he turned, there was only darkness. His camera battery indicator flashed red. He aimed one last time at the center of the tent to capture a wide shot. As the lens focused, he froze. Through the viewfinder, he could clearly see a human figure standing near the ring, motionless, head slightly tilted. The light blinked, and the figure vanished. He lowered the camera, nothing there. "Probably lens flare," he muttered, forcing a nervous laugh. But the moment he took a step toward the exit, the camera clicked on by itself and took another photo. The sound echoed in the empty tent. When he checked the preview, the image was nearly black, except for one detail. In the far background, faint but visible, was a clown silhouette, positioned right behind him, smiling. A cold wind rushed through the tent, snuffing out the last of the candle smoke. Mark's recorder picked up a final noise, soft, distant, and unmistakable. It was a child's laugh, short and broken, fading into static. The screen of the camera glitched, the frame froze mid-movement, and the words "Rex" stopped blinking. That was the last moment Mark remembered clearly before everything went silent. Mark didn't sleep that night. The laughter from the recording still echoed in his head, a sound that felt too clear to be the wind. He told himself it was stress, exhaustion from walking all day through that ruin, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the silhouette behind him in the photo. He kept replaying the image in his mind, zooming in mentally, wondering if it was just a trick of light. By morning, curiosity had already won over fear. Mark returned to his apartment and spread his notes across the table. Dirt from the circus grounds still clung to his shoes. As he unpacked the camera, a strange smell came from his backpack, faintly smoky, mixed with old celluloid. Inside one of the outer pockets, he found a small black VHS tape, wrapped in a piece of newspaper that looked decades old. The handwriting on the label was shaky but readable, "Last show." He didn't remember picking it up. Still, he placed it beside his laptop and stared at it for a long moment. There was no VCR in the apartment, but his neighbor, a retired electrician named Carl, had an old one in his workshop. When Mark brought the tape over, Carl chuckled. "Man, I haven't seen one of these in years. What's on it?" "Probably an old circus act," Mark said, trying to sound casual. Carl plugged the player into a dusty TV. The image flickered, and then music filled the room, cheerful, off-key circus tunes. The frame showed the interior of the Golden Smile Circus, full of families clapping, children waving balloons. Everything seemed normal. Then the lights in the tent dimmed, and the clown entered. At first, the crowd laughed. The performer moved stiffly, his painted grin too wide, eyes almost blank. The camera shook slightly as if someone's hands were trembling. The clown pointed at a girl in the front row, then turned toward the ringmaster, who looked suddenly uneasy. The music stopped. A second later, the entire image distorted into static. Carl adjusted the tracking knob, frowning. Old tape, maybe damaged. The picture returned, but now the tent was empty. No audience, no music, only the clown standing alone, staring directly at the lens. He raised his hand and slowly waved, then tilted his head to one side. The frame shook again, this time violently, as if the cameraman had dropped the device. Then came a sound. A woman's scream, followed by the crying of a child. The camera turned, catching a glimpse of the crowd running for the exits. The last thing visible before the tape cut out was the tent collapsing inward, the camera falling onto the ground, still recording. Mark's skin went cold. Carl said nothing, just rewound the tape automatically, but Mark grabbed his hand. "Wait." He wanted to check the end frame. He pressed play again, this time watching carefully. The screen flickered, and for a split second, something appeared that hadn't been there before, a face in the reflection of the lens, standing behind the clown. The face was young, unpainted, terrified. Mark leaned closer. The face looked like his own. Carl exhaled sharply. "You okay, kid? You're pale." Mark shut off the TV. "Yeah, I just need air." He took the tape and left without another word. Back home, he set it on the table, staring at the label. He didn't want to believe what he saw. Maybe a resemblance, maybe the power of suggestion. He went to shower, trying to clear his head. When he returned, the tape was gone. The spot where it had been was empty, except for a faint black smear, like soot. He searched everywhere, under the couch, behind the desk, nothing. The apartment was silent, except for a soft clicking sound coming from the living room. His video camera, still connected to the laptop, had turned on by itself. The screen displayed a paused image. It wasn't from his earlier footage at the circus. It showed his apartment, from the same angle he was standing now. Then the screen blinked, and a new message appeared across the frame, written in shaky white letters: "The show never ends." Mark's pulse hammered in his ears. He pulled the plug from the socket, killing the power, and the room went black. For a moment, he stood completely still, listening. Through the open window came the faint sound of a carnival tune, slow, warped, as if carried by the wind. He turned on his flashlight and walked toward the window. The night outside was empty, only the streetlights flickering. But on the glass, illuminated by the beam, something had been written from the inside. "The show never ends." The same words. Only this time, they were smeared in something red, dripping slowly down the pane. Mark stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in his grip. The air grew heavy, dense with the same burnt sweet smell from the tent. Somewhere, far away but growing louder, came the faint sound of clapping. The power returned suddenly. His camera turned on again, recording. The lens pointed directly at him. The screen displayed a grainy reflection, his face staring back, wide-eyed. And behind him, in the faint glow, a figure in a clown mask stood perfectly still. The next morning, Mark woke up on the floor beside his couch. The light from the window was pale and cold. For a few seconds, he couldn't remember where he was or why the camera was lying near his hand. The red writing on the window had vanished during the night. No stains, no marks, just clean glass. For a moment, he convinced himself it had all been a hallucination, a product of exhaustion and paranoia. But then he noticed the smell again, that strange mix of burnt sugar and smoke that clung to his jacket. It hadn't gone anywhere. He told himself he needed answers. The tape, the photo, the figure, maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the people who once worked there still lived nearby. He searched online archives, finding an old employee list of the Golden Smile Circus. Among the faded names, one entry caught his eye: Director, Harold Merrow. Deceased, 2003. Beneath it, another, young acrobat, Marco Merrow, age 10. Died during the accident. Mark stared at the screen. The name, the age, the detail, it felt like the universe was mocking him. He decided he needed to go back, not out of bravery, but because the only way to stop the fear was to face it. He arrived at the circus grounds in the late afternoon. The sky was gray again, heavy with rain. The wind pushed the tall grass like ocean waves, whispering through broken caravans. The tent was still there, bent and silent. But this time, something had changed. Near the entrance, someone had drawn a fresh circle of white chalk on the ground. Inside it, a single balloon swayed in the wind, its string tied to a rusted pole. Mark stepped closer. The balloon was deflated, its surface covered with fingerprints. He took out his camera, but the screen glitched the moment he turned it on. Faint static crept across the display, forming shapes he couldn't quite identify. Inside the tent, the smell was stronger than before. The candles were gone, replaced by rows of dusty chairs that hadn't been there during his first visit. They formed a full ring around the stage, perfectly symmetrical, each seat facing the center. On the ground lay scattered pieces of costumes, gloves, ribbons, pieces of fabric still bright beneath the dust. He found an old trunk near the side curtain. Inside were photographs, faded, cracked, and water-damaged. Smiling performers, children holding balloons, the ringmaster in his red coat. He flipped through them until one photo stopped his breath. It showed the group of performers standing together before the last show. In the background, slightly out of focus, was a child in an acrobat's costume, thin, short-haired, smiling nervously. The caption on the back read, "Marco's first big night." The ground beneath Mark's feet seemed to tilt. The boy looked just like him. Same face, same scar under the left eyebrow, a scar Mark had since childhood from a fall on a playground. He whispered, "No. That's impossible." Then he heard it again, faint laughter, echoing through the tent. It wasn't cheerful, it sounded broken, as if recorded and replayed through damaged speakers. The sound grew louder, bouncing from wall to wall, until it surrounded him. "Who's there?" he shouted. His own voice trembled. From the corner of the tent, something moved. The old stage lights flickered once, then twice. Through the dusty air, he saw faint silhouettes, figures standing among the empty seats. He blinked hard, but they remained. They weren't fully visible, just outlines in the air, glowing faintly. One of them wore a tall hat. Another twirled something in its hand, a juggling pin. Mark stumbled backward, tripping over a wooden beam. The laughter stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. He crawled toward the exit but noticed something near the entrance, an old circus program lying open on the ground. The pages were burned around the edges. He picked it up and read the first line. Tonight's performers, the ringmaster, the twins, the juggler, the acrobat, Mark O'Maro. The ink was smudged, but the name was unmistakable. His name. Mark's heart pounded. He dropped the booklet, his breath turning shallow. The tent seemed to pulse with heat. He raised his camera again, trying to record everything before running. Through the viewfinder, the world looked distorted, darker. The seats that had been empty a moment ago were now filled with shadows, hundreds of still shapes watching him. He backed toward the flap, whispering to himself, "It's not real, it's not real." Then, from the far end of the tent, a spotlight flickered on, pointing directly at the center ring. Something was hanging from the ceiling, a faded poster, swaying slowly. The title read, "The Show Continues, featuring Mark O'Maro." He dropped the camera and ran. The last thing it recorded was his own reflection in a broken mirror near the exit. Behind him, among the flickering lights, stood the clown, the same one from the tape, raising his gloved hand in a slow, mocking wave. Mark didn't stop running until he reached his car. Even with the doors locked, he could still hear the faint sound of applause coming from the field behind him. He drove all night, headlights cutting through the rain, the echo of laughter following him like static in the air. Mark didn't return to the circus for 3 days. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces from the photographs staring back at him. He barely ate, barely spoke. The sound of applause haunted his dreams, soft and distant at first, then closer, as if it was happening in the next room. On the third night, his phone rang. An unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, but when he checked the recording later, all he heard was faint carnival music and a whisper, "It's time for the last show." He knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. He needed answers. He started searching through local records, old newspapers, and library archives. Buried in an old article from 2003, he found a single surviving name from the Golden Smile Circus, Martha Reynolds, former costume designer. The article mentioned that she now lived in a nursing home just outside town. That same afternoon, Mark drove there. The building was small, quiet, surrounded by trees that creaked in the wind. A nurse led him to a dimly lit room where an old woman sat in a wheelchair, her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes were cloudy but sharp when they focused on him. "Are you Martha Reynolds?" he asked gently. She nodded. "You shouldn't have come here, child," she whispered. "It's already started again." Mark froze. "You know about the circus?" Her gaze shifted toward the window. "I helped sew their costumes. I was there that night. The storm came early. The lights failed, the animals screamed, and the tent came down like a coffin. We lost them all, the twins, the juggler, even little Marco." She paused, her voice trembling. "The director, he couldn't bear it. He swore he'd reopen the show someday. He said laughter never dies, it only waits for someone to return." Mark's throat tightened. "You said, little Marco?" She nodded slowly. His real name was Mark O'Maro. 10 years old. He was the son of the ringmaster. "You look like him." He felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible." "Is it?" she whispered. Sometimes, places remember more than people do. The circus has a way of calling back what it lost. That's how it keeps the tent alive. Mark leaned forward. What do you mean keeps it alive? Martha's hands trembled. Every time someone enters that place after dark, it begins again. The laughter, the lights, the crowd, they need an audience, and they need a performer. The show cannot end until the circle is complete. She reached into her blanket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. I kept this, she said, handing it to him. Inside was a small gold pin shaped like a mask, half smiling, half crying. It belonged to Marco. Burn it. Burn everything. Or they'll come for you too. Before he could respond, Martha's breathing quickened. Her eyes rolled back, and her hand slipped from his. The nurse ran in seconds later, but it was too late. She was gone. That night, Mark drove straight back to the circus grounds. The clouds hung low and heavy. He parked by the rusted gate and stared into the darkness. He could feel the hum of energy in the air, as if the earth itself was waiting. He poured gasoline around the tent's perimeter, every movement trembling. The wind picked up, carrying faint music, the circus theme, warped and distant. He struck a match and hesitated. Then he heard clapping. Soft, rhythmic, coming from inside the tent. His breath caught. The fabric rippled, though there was no breeze strong enough to move it. Slowly, he lifted the flap and stepped inside. The tent was alive again. Lights flickered, illuminating rows of seats filled with silhouettes. The stage glowed in the center. On it stood the ringmaster, tall, pale, wearing a cracked red coat. His eyes glimmered like glass. Welcome back, Marco, the ringmaster said, his voice calm and cold. Mark's knees weakened. My name's not Marco, he whispered. The man tilted his head. Names change, faces don't. The audience has been waiting for you. Around the stage, the shadows began to move. The juggler tossed invisible pins into the air. The twins swayed in perfect unison. The laughter grew louder, blending with applause. Mark backed away, but the exit flap had vanished. Only the ringmaster's voice echoed through the air, every show must have its final act. Flames suddenly licked across the fabric where the gasoline had spilled. Smoke filled the tent, and the laughter twisted into screams. Mark stumbled toward the center ring, gasping. Through the smoke, he saw the clown standing perfectly still, mask cracked, eyes hollow. You wanted the truth, the clown said softly. Now perform. The fire spread faster than he could move. The stage collapsed, the air roaring with heat. For one brief moment, he saw the audience again, not shadows anymore, but faces. The same ones from the photographs. All smiling. All watching him burn. Mark dropped the golden pin into the flames. The sound of clapping faded, replaced by silence. The tent roof crumbled, and everything went dark. When the fire department arrived hours later, they found nothing but ash and twisted metal. No human remains, no body. Only a melted gold mask half buried in the soil. The morning after the fire, the field outside Halewood was wrapped in a low gray mist. Firefighters moved carefully among the ashes, boots sinking into wet soil. The smell of burned fabric and gasoline still hung heavy in the air. The circus that had once been called the Golden Smile was gone. What remained was a black circle of earth and fragments of twisted metal poles. At 7:30 a.m., the county police arrived. Sergeant Donnelly led the report. No remains, he said, flipping through his notebook. No trace of human presence. Just debris and a half-melted camera. The camera was found near the center of the burn zone, surprisingly intact despite the heat. It was still powered on, red recording light blinking steadily. When they played back the footage at the station, the first few minutes were chaos, smoke, shouting, the flicker of flames. Then, through the distortion, they saw Mark. He was standing in the middle of the ring, surrounded by fire, pointing the lens at himself. His face was covered in soot, his eyes unfocused. I tried, he said hoarsely, coughing between words. I tried to stop it. But it's not the tent, it's what's inside it. They don't want the laughter to die. Behind him, the flames formed strange shapes, outlines of people clapping, faint and wavering. The sound on the recording was full of static, but beneath it, the faint echo of carnival music played, slow and broken. Then the screen shook violently. The image blurred, and Mark's face came close to the camera. His expression was calm now, almost peaceful. "If laughter dies here again," he whispered, "maybe this time, it stays dead." The camera dropped. The last few seconds showed the roof collapsing, followed by darkness. The recording stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m. The investigation closed within 2 days. The official report labeled it an accidental structural fire caused by trespassing. No remains were ever found. Mark's name appeared in local newspapers for a week, then disappeared like every other unsolved case in town. But a month later, a tourist hiking near the forest edge noticed something strange. The once empty field no longer looked burned. Grass had grown again, a perfect, circular patch of green surrounded by trees. In the center stood a single wooden pole, blackened at the base, with a piece of fabric hanging from it like a flag. When the man approached, he realized it was a fragment of Circus tent. On it, written in faint gold letters, were the words, "The show must go on." That night, the man reported hearing faint music coming from the field, a calliope tune, off-key and distant. He told police the sound stopped the moment he stepped onto the grass. Weeks passed. The town forgot again. But someone at the local news station, while editing a segment about the fire, stumbled upon a file that shouldn't have existed. It was an unlisted video uploaded automatically to a cloud folder linked to Mark's camera. The timestamp matched the night of the fire. The footage began with static, then cleared. The tent stood whole again, no flames, no smoke, just the circus as it once was. Rows of people sat in the audience, clapping softly. The ringmaster stepped forward, adjusting his red coat. He looked straight into the lens. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a deep, resonant voice, "tonight we welcome back our star performer." The camera panned slowly to the center of the stage. Standing there, under a single spotlight, was Mark. He was dressed in the same acrobat's costume from the old photographs, white shirt, gold suspenders, bare feet covered in ash. His expression was calm, almost serene. The applause grew louder. The lights brightened, revealing more of the tent. The faces in the audience weren't strangers anymore, they were the performers who'd died 15 years ago. The twins. The juggler. The clown. And in the front row, Martha Reynolds, her face pale but smiling faintly. Mark bowed once, lifted his head, and looked straight into the camera. The sound of laughter began again, echoing through the speakers, cheerful but hollow. Then the screen went black. When the technicians tried to replay the file, it had vanished. No metadata, no record of upload. Only one frame remained, a single still image extracted from the video. It showed the inside of the tent, empty except for the stage and a handwritten sign hanging from the roof. The circus where no one laughs anymore. Months later, the site became a small tourist attraction. Locals called it the Silent Circus. Visitors came during the day to take photos of the burnt field and tell ghost stories to each other. But those who stayed past midnight reported the same thing, faint laughter drifting through the air, as if from a distant tent, followed by the quiet rustle of an audience waiting for the curtain to rise. The police eventually fenced off the area after too many break-ins. Yet every few weeks, the security guard on night shift would swear he saw lights flickering behind the trees, soft golden light, moving in circles. And sometimes, when the wind blew in the right direction, the faintest whisper of applause carried across the field. The story of Mark Merrow ended there. No one ever saw him again. But the legend of the Golden Smile Circus continued, not in the news, not in official records, but in the whispers of those who still live nearby. They say if you stand at the edge of the field after midnight and listen carefully, you'll hear someone say the same words the tape once recorded. The show never ends.